welcome to this week's edition of Bowl Season Stories. I'm Nick Carparelli, the Executive Director of Bowl Season, and each week, different guests from the world of college football join me to talk about current topics in the sport, as well as discuss what they remember most about their bowl game experiences. Our guests include members of the media, former players, coaches, sports executives, and even fans who will share their favorite bowl season stories with you. Today, we are joined by CBS Sports senior writer Dennis Dodd, University of Oklahoma football legend Tony Casillas, and Fiesta Bowl and Guaranteed Rate Bowl Executive Director Mike Nealy. Also joining me, as she does each week, is our on-air producer, Angela Lang. Good morning, Angela, and welcome to the first day of fall.
Oh my gosh, it's starting to feel like it here. You know, Nick, I'm in the Dallas area, so it's finally cool in the mornings. Loving that. Hopefully you're having a nice weather up where you are. And when it starts to feel like fall, don't you feel like that's when it really starts to feel like football season is setting in?
Absolutely. Technically, it started 3 weeks ago. I think college football for a lot of us is synonymous with the fall, but it's probably appropriate that the first day of fall is actually today, because as we enter week 4 of the season, this is when the storylines really start kicking in.
Absolutely. And to talk about those storylines, as you mentioned, Dennis Dodd joins us, and it's so exciting to welcome him, not just because he is a fixture of college football since 1988, but he's also my fellow Mizzou alum. Dennis, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, MIZ. And yeah, we could just do the next 2 hours on the Tigers if you want, Angela.
That's right. ZOU. I got to finish that for you,
That's
Nick.
right.
But because Nick is not, he doesn't know about the Tiger thing. He's a Syracuse guy, but he's going to jump in with some of the storylines of the start of the college season going into week 4.
Dennis, how popular is college football nowadays? We're only 3 weeks in, and I think I read yesterday there's already been 5 games televised that have had over 7.5 million viewers. Last year, it took all the way to the last week of the season to have that many games. Just an amazing start to the season.
And I thought that was one of the storylines of last season, Nick, that, you know, obviously empty stadiums or partially filled stadiums, but there was a lack of I don't know what the word is. There wasn't as much interest in the game. And was that a factor of COVID? You know, you saw the ratings down almost across the board, even in the CFP. And I can't explain it. Were people just doing something else with their time? Were they occupied by COVID? Did it not matter as much? But like you said, across the board, the ratings are up. I think the latest was Alabama, Florida. You know, Alabama hadn't played in the swamp in 10 years, and then a fantastic game. And a lot of TV types will say, okay, the benchmarks are halftime. Is it interesting? And then going into the fourth quarter, because that's how they do these metrics. You know, that's how they do these metrics for advertisers. And the ratings were fantastic. I think that was one of those that was over that mark.
Well, I think that answers a big question. People were curious, how will live sports in general rebound after COVID? How will live attendance rebound? I think some of the images we've seen on TV, I think the answer is pretty clear. It's rebounded pretty well.
Absolutely. I first week I was at Charlotte, 74,000, Georgia, Clemson. The atmosphere was like a playoff game. And the way the game was played was almost like a playoff game. No offensive touchdowns, 10-3, you know, every snap meant something. And then week 2 at Ohio State, 100,000 fans, their first home game with fans in, 600 something days. And they were full throat. Now the game didn't go their way, but it did my heart good just to be there and just to feel that again, because I went to one game last year, true confessions. I went to a Missouri-Alabama game in week 1 because I could drive to it. And then that was it. I didn't even go to the playoff. So that'll be in the book someday. That was the deep depression I was in last year.
Well, it was week 3 last week, and threes were wild, Dennis. 33 teams now have 3 wins. And for us here at bowl season, that means they're halfway to punching their ticket to bowl eligibility, which we know for every school is kind of the first goal, right? The first check mark, get to the 6th win, get to a bowl game, and then you build on that. Interesting to note for me, 6 teams in the Big Ten are already 3-0, 6 in the SEC, 5 in the Big 12, but only 1 in the Pac-12. You know, in the first week or 2, the Pac-12 seemed to have a lot more promise than they may have had in recent past. And I think that changed last week.
Yeah, as much excitement there was around the Pac-12 with UCLA and Oregon, we had that hiccup, which we always do, it seems like, in recent years, where Fresno walks into the Rose Bowl and pretty much hands it to UCLA. UCLA made a big comeback, grabbed the lead late, only to see Fresno and Jake Hayner, pull their hearts out of their chest, going 75 yards in 40 seconds, I think, to win the game. And not to say that UCLA's out of it, but you would expect them, the way they're playing, to win a game like that, especially playing as physical as they are. So, you're going to have to come back from that. And Oregon, so you got Oregon sitting there at number 3 with, the lone playoff hope right now. And I saw them at Ohio State, as I mentioned. I think they've got the chops to win the rest of their games. Their schedule kind of works out that way. But with any Pac-12 team, projecting that now is a big risk. But Mario Cristobal's done a great job there.
So great to have you here, Dennis, to give your take on the season so far and talk to us about what's going on in college football today. And we are so thankful to have you stick around to help talk with our next guest as he shares his bowl season stories from the 1980s. Before he was a back-to-back Super Bowl champion with the Dallas Cowboys, our next guest helped make his name as an All-American lineman at the University of Oklahoma, where he helped the Sooners win a national championship in 1985. Please welcome Tony Casillas to the podcast. Tony, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Tony, Nick Carparelli here. I'm the executive director of Bowl Season. Thanks so much for joining us on the show. You've had a great NFL career, won 2 Super Bowls with the Cowboys, but you can't get very far talking about Tony Casillas without mentioning the University of Oklahoma and those great teams in the mid-'80s under Barry Switzer. I know you bleed crimson and cream. What does it mean to you to be an Oklahoma Sooner?
Well, it's interesting because last week they had the Nebraska-Oklahoma game that they rekindled that home and away matchup. And so this kind of, as you mentioned, just kind of brought me down memory road when it comes to what it means to play for Oklahoma, because I remember those games in December or October. It always meant something. It meant that we were playing for the Big 8 championship. But ultimately, as you mentioned, in the bowl season, playing in the Orange Bowl for usually the national championship. So it represents so much, because although when you get older, you get a little grayer and you move on, you still have those that great resume and that great history of those games you played in. And obviously YouTube kind of reminds you, the video's kind of grainy, but man, I tell you what, there were some great moments in Oklahoma football.
Yeah, Tony, I actually went in. This is Dennis Dodd here from CBS Sports. I actually sat down and watched the game in Century again last week. I sat down for 3 hours and watched the whole thing just to gather it in. You were, I guess, with all those legends last week, and Joe Castiglione, the AD, had made such a big effort to do this. This was really his baby to play this game against Nebraska. What was that like, I guess, the Friday night before and just living through that game again?
Well, Dennis, unfortunately, I wasn't there. I was at Parents Weekend at the University of Arkansas. My daughter's a junior. But regardless, I can just only imagine. I think it was just great tribute to the Selma Brothers. I know they made a statue of them, long overdue in my book, because they represented so much. I mean, who could ever imagine 3 brothers playing on the defensive line, how great they were. But it's always good to put that type of history be back together again, because that represents the family of schools like Oklahoma and the legacy. And I think a lot of that has to do with Barry Switzer. Barry Switzer, we're all family. I mean, we all have a group text message. It's a big family. But that's what it represents, is being able to go back, those guys, reliving those moments. And the Nebraska, Oklahoma, as I mentioned earlier, just it meant something. And you go back and watch those games, and football was a little different back then, but it was still, there was a lot of symbolic meaning behind it. And I think that's what those players and the legacy of all the players have gone through, Norman, how important it is.
All right. I apologize. So let's go back to 85. I think that was my first Orange Bowl. I covered you guys. I don't know if I was at the Miami game, but that changed everything that year. Could you have ever thought, or well, let's say this, what was the standing of Jamel Holloway at that time? You had Troy, things were going to change a little bit, maybe more passing in the offense, but who was Jamel Holloway before Troy went down in the Miami game?
Well, he's pretty much an unknown. And
Yeah.
I think that no one knew about Jamel Holloway. It was just this guy that was a freshman, never played college football. As you mentioned, Troy went down against Miami. And so it was just we didn't know what was going to happen. I think that I always kid Troy when I see him. Is like, it's hard to imagine you were a wishbone quarterback. And he goes, man, I was a lot faster than that. But, Jamel just really sometimes when you don't know any better, when you're green and you're able to run that offense. I mean, granted, we had great running backs, offensive line to execute, but he was such a great downhill runner. But Dennis, obviously, what I really remember about 85 is what we did in 84 to get us back to the Orange Bowl, because we didn't take care of business against Washington. We embarrassed Coach Switzer, and he was going to make it known that we're going to take care of business when we went back to this to the Orange Bowl in 85 and played Penn State. And I remember this vividly. We had two-a-days. So all the people that think that Coach Switzer is this guy that doesn't grind on you, he made it a point where we're actually going to have two-a-days during the bowl week. Imagine that. Imagine you couldn't even think about that now, obviously. But back then, two-a-days, and we actually got after it. We brought in these cots, catered lunch, and we took a little nap. We actually did that for 3 days. But he's going to get our attention. There wasn't going to be any distractions against Penn State after what happened the following year to Washington.
Amazing.
Tony, back then, you went into a bowl game and it wasn't predetermined necessarily to be for the national championship, right? Miami was also playing Tennessee in the Sugar Bowl at that time, right? And there was the notion that you could have possibly split the national championship if the Hurricanes won, even though Miami's only loss was to you earlier in the season. Were you guys watching that score at all during your game? I imagine it wasn't easy to follow back then as it is today.
We wasn't following it on social media, on Twitter or anything like that. I think we were doing some scoreboard watching, but we really didn't think about that. I think that we just knew that, look, we had to take care of Penn State. It was a very formidable opponent. We knew that they'd be prepared. We knew it was going to be a dogfight, and we kind of learned our lesson the following year. So that's really what we were focused on. Now, that thought was probably in the back of our minds. We knew going into the game that we had to win to give our chance a shot. But it was just one of those things that we knew collectively our defense was just so ferocious, and we knew that it was just going to be one of those games that we're just going to have to play throughout the game and make big plays. And Penn State ran the football, so we need to take care of things on the football field before we're even worried about any chance of winning a national championship.
I want to go back to the two-a-days real quick. I don't know if I've ever heard that, but where did you guys practice? Was it a local high school, or where'd you guys practice?
It's actually Tropicana Stadium. I think it may have been a community college, Dennis. Yeah. And it's been so long ago but it's amazing the things that you remember. I mean, we have the selective memory, and I think some as you get older, you forget about some of those things, but that was the thing, the defining moment, because it was real. We had guys that were just, we were partying, having a good time. And we just took Washington very lightly the year before. And that's what we did. So when we first found out and we got the schedule, we're thinking, we're going to have 2 days during bowl week in Miami. Coach, are you serious? Goes, yeah. And I remember him vividly in having this team meeting and say, yeah, we're going to go down there. And as I mentioned, you're not going to embarrass me again. You're not going to embarrass yourselves. You're not going to embarrass Sooner Nation. Like, okay, we get it. So the first day, as I mentioned, it was just so weird because you're not 2-a-day mode. And maybe it was just, he wanted to get our attention because he wanted us to go have a good time. But based on what happened the year before, you're not gonna have like a later curfew. Your curfew is to be in practice in 2 days and get ready for preparation. And it was crazy to think that we could do that. And then just kind of reality set in, and we thought, now that we look back on it, I don't ever hear Coach Switzer ever talk about that. I mean, he's did some things as a coach, and I admire, and some things I scratch in my head, but that's the best thing that ever happened for us, because it got our attention. It made us focus and get in our lane of what we need to do against Penn State and hopefully win a national championship.
You mentioned your defense that season and that game. You won the Lombardi Award that year as the best lineman, but you also had 2 other All-Americans on your defense, Leslie O'Neal and Brian Bosworth. In that game, you guys had 4 interceptions, 5 turnovers total. Well, tell us what that defense was like and how much confidence you all had that season, especially coming into the Orange Bowl against Penn State.
Well, actually, Leslie O'Neal played for Oklahoma State, but he was a tremendous player that played. But yeah, Brian Bosworth, myself, you look at our defensive line, we had Kevin Murphy, we had Troy Johnson, we had Dale Reed. We had so much speed. And I don't think it was just one of us. I mean, collectively, we played really good team defense. We're so fast. And I think we took a lot of pride on playing technique and understanding our role. That type of defense, you're talking about protecting your linebackers, protecting the platoon. That's what our whole gratification was, to make sure our linebackers could just be freely and run the football. Now, Brian Bosworth won't tell you that because it was all about his persona and him making plays. But when I go back and I watch what we did as a defensive front and collectively our speed, granted, it was different. We went into defensive mode as far as stop and run. There's no one could get to the edges. We had so much speed and we're so disruptive. And, when people threw against us, yeah, they may have some success, but then ultimately we would adjust. And it was all about what our front seven did to an offense.
That's really good. I think there's only two people maybe on this podcast, Tony, that have been in Brian Bosworth's dorm room. I distinctly remember one of those years, may have been 85, but when he was breaking out as, this kind of counterculture guy with the dyed hair and everything. Yeah. That's one thing, his public persona, but did you guys, even apart from him going, okay, this guy's a player, or did it matter? If you can play, it doesn't matter how you present yourself.
Well, I think certainly it did. I think some of the things of what came out of Brian Bosworth's mouth at Sooner, I think people really just felt like he had no respect for his teammates and wasn't really contrite about that. And I think that's the thing about it, is when you're playing your ass off, pardon my language, when you're playing really, really hard, and that's what your whole motive is to be a great defense and to understand the responsibility, as I mentioned, take pride in what you do and letting them play their position based on their role. Then sometimes that comes back and really the perception is that he really is a team player, which is fine. But when you're on the football field, Dennis, you coexist with so many personalities. It doesn't matter. You're out there. You're out there for 3 hours. You don't think about those things. You think about the moment. You think about the fans. You think about playing for your coaches. You think about playing for one another. So you don't really have that. That's not something you're in this animosity mode while you're playing, because ultimately, what you do is you're going to have pride. And I think we took pride in being great. And to be great, you can't have this outside venom and poison in your head just because you resent another player. So we didn't really think about that. We thought about the common goal, and that was being the greatest defense in my eye to ever play at the University of Oklahoma.
Yeah. And you may have just been that, Tony.
Well,
I'm sure you would argue that you were.
Well, I think that I go back and I look, and not that I think that the thing that when you go back and you look at the history of what your play and what you've done, and I think the game's changed so much. It's tilted to a different direction, and that. But yeah, I think that when you're out there and you're part of a legacy, you're part of a national championship, you're part of something really, really special. You go back and well, how did you get there? And obviously our offense is good, but defensively, I mean, you look at our statistics and the players that we had on the team, and we always our pride was giving ourselves a chance to win. And look, that's just part of the game mode and part of being a football player. And then that's a DNA that will always last forever.
Well, here on Bowl Season Stories, we try to do just that, Tony. There's so many great stories around bowl games, things that happen on the field, but even off the field. You mentioned the disappointment in that Orange Bowl loss to Washington. A lot of people might not remember this, and you correct me if I'm a little bit off on the facts, but the Sooner Schooner may have delivered the turning point in that game. Again, correct me. I think the score was tied at 14 early in the fourth quarter. You guys kicked a 22-yard field goal, but were penalized. So you're going to back up 5 yards. Apparently, the Sooner Schooner was not aware of the penalty. So it continued to celebrate, rode out to the field, got stuck in the wet grass in front of the Huskies sideline. You were assessed another 15 yards, and then the ensuing 42-yard field goal got blocked. So I'm sure you guys weren't too happy with the schooner at that point.
Well, unfortunately, we couldn't really blame it on the schooner. We just didn't play well. But that was kind of like the narrative in that game. Stuff just didn't go right. Certainly the schooner didn't tip over like it did a couple of years ago. I was actually at the game, so it wasn't that atrocious. But that was kind of like a really quirky game. It's kind of just the vibe was different. And some of the guys I played with Kevin Gogan, who played on that team, and he was my teammate in Dallas, and he'd always give me a hard time because they'd always trap us and get us upfield, and they'd just gouge us for big yards. But you know what? I mean, if it was something that we could really blame it on, the schooner and it coming out on the field, that was just they were kind of sleepwalking like we did. Maybe they just didn't pay enough attention to detail that week, just like us. Maybe it was just kind of this trickled down and through them. But it just felt like it was an uphill battle that day. It was just one of those things that you go in thinking you're a heavy favorite. And this, next thing you know it, they're on top of you, and you have things like that happen. It takes you out of field position. You're not able to execute. And before you know it, you're upset and not feeling very good about yourself.
Tony, what was it like going to the Orange Bowl for the first time? Because there's something to be said for that. And then playing there, it's always hot and muggy and everybody's right on top of you. I don't know if there'll ever be a place like that in bowl lore, I guess.
It was unique, Dennis. I think that when I followed Oklahoma football, it's all about the oranges. It's all about November when they threw oranges on the field. You knew that it was raining oranges, so it's kind of coveted. It was something that was just an unusual thing for Oklahoma to play in the Orange Bowl. And I'm thinking, growing up and watching that game, I'm thinking I want to be part of something like that. But there was nothing like the Orange Bowl. We stayed at the Fountain Blue Hotel, and I just didn't know this, but about 6 or 7 years ago, they refurbished it and renovated. It's an amazing place now. It looks nothing like it used to look, like before. But I wanted to be at the Fountain Blue Hotel. I wanted to be down at Miami Vice. I want to be down on South Beach. I want to be part of it. All this dudes from Oklahoma never been on, down at South Beach, where it's a little trendier and it's a little different than Norman, Oklahoma. But just want to be part of that whole picture and the whole experience. And to your point too, man, that's the thing about it. You mentioned it's not like it is now. We get 30 days off to prepare for a bowl game. You're playing in a national championship, and it wasn't really. It's more the unofficial one, as you alluded to earlier, as far as the rankings, how it could work out. But the problem was that there was enough time in there to get out of shape. Us defensive linemen, offensive linemen, you're out on the field, all of a sudden it's like, wow, I'm gassed. But so it's something you never really get acclimated to. I think the answer to that is just not being on the field that long. But there was something about being on South Beach, staying at the Fountain Blue Hotel, and actually winning that game afterwards, because you knew the afterward party was going to be great. And I was watching Scarface. Some of you guys have watched Scarface before, but there's a scene about the Fountain Blue Hotel, and I'm like, yeah, I was there. In the fact, though, I was able to meet Fabio before Fabio became this great Fabio with the great hair. First time I ever met Fabio down on Fountain Blue at the Orange Bowl was him and with the supermodel girlfriend, and I thought that was cool. Little did I know, 10 or 15 years later, or however long it was, he's going to bring this household name, have this long hair, and be the Fabio that we do. So that's kind of a backdrop to that, and a little footnote of what the experience I had in the Orange Bowl.
Can you imagine Fabio today with social media?
Oh my gosh, he would probably 100 million followers. I can only imagine how he would just utilize that brand.
Tony, one last question for you. You mentioned Coach Switzer a couple times, and I think any college football fan knows about Coach Switzer. They envision him as this colorful personality. But you played for him. You know him well. What was it like to play for Coach Switzer?
Well, I think to answer that question, I really didn't find out until once I got out of football. until once I'd left the game, and how close of friends we are now, and how this man is your lifeline, your call that you would make. All right. And I really didn't realize and appreciate that, because I think a lot of coaches, I don't know, maybe coaches are different. I don't know if they keep that connection and that relationship going until you get out of football, while you're there, obviously you have a relationship, but we're talking 30 years later, 25 years later, he stays connected. But for me, he's that unconditional guy. He'll do anything for you. You call him up, he remembers. I had a chance to go and spend time with him, and he remembers everything, remembers every stat, remembers every player recruited. And this man's 84 years old, but he remembers that vividly. And maybe that's just something that the gift of a great head coach has. But that's something that it's hard to find. And how connected he says. And my last comment on that will be, so last year going to Super Bowl, he called me up and he said, "Hey, Tony," it says, how many Super Bowl rings you win? I said, "Got 2." And he goes, "Well, they didn't mention you. They were doing some article and they didn't mention you." I'm not very mad. I said, "Oh, it's okay, coach. It's all right." The game was that night. And so I said, "Well, I got you on the phone. Let me ask you this. You won a Super Bowl, the Cowboys, the last one the Cowboys have won, unfortunately. It's been a long time. And you won 5, how many national championships you won? Which experience did you met the most?" He goes, "Well, Tony, I tell you what, this one in the Super Bowl, there's all those guys in that roster I didn't know. There's guys that went through free agency I didn't know. But when I was a college coach, I remember everyone. I knew their moms, I knew their sisters, I knew where we're in the high school, I knew what their favorite food was, what their favorite alcoholic beverage was, their dad." And he said, "That's what I remember, and that's what I experienced." And so, to your point about that, that's the relationship you have with a Coach Switzer. You got a friend forever. So, they broke the mold whenever they made that dude, man, and just to be able to be around him and talk to him and the stories and everything, best storyteller you'll ever you hear. Just his whole experience is genuine, and his passion and everything. It's just amazing. So. He's by far one of the biggest impact that anyone's ever made in my life.
And Tony, I talked to him last week for the Nebraska-Oklahoma game, and 84, you mentioned sharp as a tack. I hope we're all that way when we're 84. He was telling details and stories from Oklahoma-Nebraska games that I had me laughing out loud. It was unbelievable. So, yeah, we'll never forget Coach Switzer.
Yeah, he's a legacy that'll live forever. And the thing about him, Dennis, with Coach Switzer, like, you're not supposed to get old, because he doesn't age. I mean, you see him with people, but his mind is so sharp. And again, it's just it's amazing the memories and the things that you go through the coach, and 30 years later, you have a stronger relationship. I don't think a lot of former players can say that about their former head coaches.
Well, there's no doubt we could talk all day about this stuff. This has been a fun conversation for me. Thank you both so much for being on the show, Dennis. I know you and I will talk again soon as the season unfolds. And Tony, it was a privilege visiting with you. Thank you so much for spending time.
Hey, you guys, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
We're going to take a short break and be right back with the Fiesta Bowl and Guaranteed Rate Bowl Executive Director, Mike Nealy. Stay with us.
Thanks for listening to the Bowl Season Stories podcast, a celebration of college football that breaks down the moments, the memories, and the magic of college football. Be sure to check out Mic Drop, another podcast powered by Tony Fay PR. Mic Drop pulls back the curtain on the larger-than-life sports scene here in North Texas. From its iconic teams, state-of-the-art venues, and headline-grabbing owners and athletes, we cover it all. Download Mic Drop today.
Welcome back to Bowl Season Stories. Our next guest is Mike Nealy, Executive Director of the Arizona Sports Foundation and the Valley of the Sun Bowl Foundation, the organizations that put on the PlayStation Fiesta Bowl and the Guaranteed Rate Bowl. Welcome, Mike. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. My pleasure. My pleasure.
Mike, last year was the 50th anniversary of the Fiesta Bowl. Hard to believe. And over those years, your bowl's become known for some really unique partnerships as well as the many philanthropic initiatives that have benefited the greater Phoenix community. So let's talk about those. I'll start with your recently announced first of its kind sports betting and fantasy gaming partnership for a bowl game with Caesars. The partnership will focus on fan engagement and expanding sports gaming and education in Arizona. With sports betting going live in the state in just a few weeks, what's your vision of this type of partnership, and what are your long-term goals with this move?
Yeah, how about that? I mean, how many years ago would somebody have thought that gaming and/or sports betting would have really been an opportunity in the collegiate world? And for us, we're very excited about that opportunity. Of course, Caesars and through some of our local gaming, they've had some involvement in the valley here. But once the betting became, we knew it was coming down the path, and the interest was going to be high. We started searching for partners, and ultimately with Caesars, just a great partner to have. Really, as far as a long-term thing, I think as far as long-term for in bowl business and sports, it's here and it's going to grow, and more states are going to probably embrace the sports betting. Arizona was early on that, and we jumped on that early, and with our relationship with them, it's really a partnership in that we're using that as an opportunity to enhance our abilities to do what we do as a business and give back to the community, but also obviously as a partnership with them, getting the growth of their business. That's really what the partnership is about. We don't have a licensee relationship here, but what we are using and working with them on just a good partnership, and we're going to grow each other.
Moving over to your philanthropic efforts a little bit, you have it seems like the Fiesta Bowl is really, really locked in with helping teachers. You've had your Desert Financial Fiesta Bowl Charities Wishes for Teachers program for a long time. It's had tremendous impact in the Valley. You've also been a longtime partner with the Extra Yard for Teachers. Yeah. Now, bowl season just forged a new partnership with Extra Yard for Teachers, getting all 44 bowl games involved for the first time in the big day last week. What is it about the teaching profession that makes it a perfect fit for the Fiesta Bowl and in turn, all the bowl games?
Yeah, it was great to have that partnership and that all the bowls step forward. It was nice for Extra Yard for Teachers to partner up and facilitate this. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer, really. For ultimately at the end of the day, we're still involved with education and student athletes here. So, and I think everybody knows that the need for teachers, the need that teachers have is so great across the whole country and for sure in Arizona. So some years back when we got involved with our Wishes for Teachers program, we started off, we knew and we wanted to do something for teachers, and that just grew tremendously, both as an opportunity for us to bring other partners into it, as you mentioned, Desert Financial. So there's a business piece to that, but the need is just, it's there. And for us to be able to raise funds and then give back, we're $1 million a year to teachers, really on a random drawing basis. It's just awesome to be able to do that because we know the needs there, the importance of teachers in all of our lives, the difference that they make, at young ages for all of us know teachers that made an impact, and usually very strong and good impacts. And so for us to be able to support that, critical, and it was kind of a no-brainer, and it's worked out so well. And it's great that Extra Yard as well, we partner with them in parallel.
Well, there's no doubt, while all 44 bowl games have been involved, the Fiesta Bowl has really been a leader in that way for many, many years. So congratulations on that, Mike. Tell me how important the Fiesta Bowl and Guaranteed Rate Bowl are to the local community on every level, right? Economic, philanthropic, the image, the pride, the tradition, the competition. Yeah. How do you wrap all those touch points together to connect with the entire community?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for those that are going to listen to this and that are involved in any other bowls, I'm sure the heads are going to nod that it's kind of a known thing that having these games in a community, brings light to the community, first of all, but that economic impact is so important. And, 50 years ago when we started, that was a big piece of that is, what we could do to shed light on the community and do some good. I mean, earlier on, I think it was an anti-drug message even back in those first years. And so using the bowl for those types of reasons, but a lot of it is just the impact on the community, both in a sense of pride, and there's a huge amount of pride in, with our bowl game, and I'm sure in all the other bowl games, but when you're talking, 5,000 plus hotel rooms and, the economic impact side of this, it's very important to the community. And, it's when we have 2 of our games, we have two big matchups. We're talking, a couple $100 million of impact to the community. And over the years, obviously that adds up. And when you're talking about billions of dollars of impact over the time, that does make a big impact for our community. So that's very important. That sense of pride for the community, and it's college football, so it's just great to be able to be a part of it.
Well, I think a lot of people don't understand that aspect, Mike. The average fan might turn the TV on in December and watch your game for 3 hours and not realize the not just economic, reasons why these games are so important to the community, but just the sense of pride. Like, the people who live in your area are proud to have two teams from other parts of the country come and play in your community so they can show it off.
Absolutely. We have people lined up to be volunteers. I mean, it takes a village really to put these on. And, you always laugh, people always ask me, is that a full-time job? What do you do all year? You have this game, what possibly, it takes a village, and we rely on thousands of volunteers ultimately as well. And we are so blessed with our Yellow Jackets and our volunteers, and that speaks to the community wanting to be a part of this. And they line up to be a part of it. And it's a big sense of pride, and it's awesome to be a part of it.
Since you started your job there, Mike, do you have a favorite bowl game moment? Maybe it's not even a moment on the field. Maybe it's a moment during bowl week with the teams that sticks out in your mind. Yeah,
I kind of figured you were going to ask that question, and I thought about it a little bit, this is going to maybe I got a couple answers for you. Maybe on a personal side, I'll share. For me, not to get sappy in this, but I lost my dad about a little over a year ago, whatever. But I was able to, he was a big football fan, in college football and meant all that. I was able to get him to a game and have some access to some things that most people don't have access to. And I think that, and he was probably very proud of what I was doing and stuff. So that meant a lot to me from a personal standpoint. But for me, on an annual basis, I love being on that stage after the game, and you're looking out at these players and you realize what it means. I don't see one team can win, but when you're looking out on those players' faces and the joy and how happy that, all the trials and tribulations they went through, not only that game, but the whole season, when you're looking out there and you see how happy these guys are, and it makes you think of, all the work that goes into it, all with the staff and the volunteers and everything that comes together. And then you're looking at them in their eyes and they're so excited. That's what I remember and look forward to every year, for sure.
And it really makes you realize how meaningful these bowl games are to these guys. And it's the same thing across all 44 bowl games. It's that same feeling that every executive director gets at the end of the games.
Yeah, don't let somebody tell you that it doesn't mean something. And I don't care what game it is. Some games maybe on paper mean a little bit more than some other ones, but for those players that played in that game and had that opportunity and the experience that they did in that community, and then for those lucky ones that be able to win that game, it means a lot for sure. Yeah.
The last question for you, Mike. We made it through a tough year with COVID. We're for the most part through it. We're on our way back. What are you looking forward to the most for this 2021-22 bowl season?
Yeah, that's a softball question there, Nick. Fans in the stands, really. We went, one of our games went dark last year, and then the other one we only were allowed to have parents of players. So, boy, just getting back to the normalcy and actually having fans to be able, because besides the talking about the players and the enjoyments they have in that, when you're out there and you're walking pregame and you're just even sometimes walking through the stadium, there's a lot of joy in the fans. This is, again, it's college football, and just having that opportunity for the people to come into the game, cheer for their team. That's what I'm looking forward to.
The Guaranteed Rate Bowl is scheduled for Tuesday, December 28th at 10:15 p.m. Eastern Time at Chase Field in Phoenix, Arizona. And the PlayStation Fiesta Bowl is scheduled for Saturday, January 1st at 1 p.m. Eastern Time at State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona. Both games will be broadcast on ESPN. Mike, thanks so much for being on the show. We appreciate it.
Great, no problem. Great to see you guys. Take care.
And thank you all for listening to this week's Bowl Season Stories podcast. Please join us next week when we will welcome another lineup of great guests. If you like the show, we'd appreciate you dropping a 5-star rating for the podcast. And as always, you can follow all the podcast and bowl season news on our website, bowlseason.com, and on social media at Bowl Season. Thanks for listening.